Well, it's the fantasy playoffs, and there's no more guessing and no more hoping. You need the quarterbacks who can deliver when everything is on the line. So let's dive into Week 15 QB rankings. What's up, Headliner Nation? My name is Brad, the Rankings King. And before we dive into this week's rankings, just a reminder that these are the consensus rankings from the Headliners team. And for more detailed analysis, make sure to check out the start-sit videos already posted on the channel this week. And if you want even more breakdowns each week, join the Fantasy Headliners community by hitting that join button below. That's going to get you access to extra rankings like flex, kicker, defense, and a spot inside of our Discord. Now, before we get into this week, let's look at a couple of our hits and misses from Week 14. And we start with Matthew Stafford and 3 rushing touchdowns by the backs in LA couldn't keep Stafford from throwing another 3 touchdowns. We had him at QB4 and he finished at QB5. And number 2, we've got Lamar Jackson, and Lamar has disappointed for multiple weeks, but we weren't about to take too big of a risk and drop him outside of the top 10. We kept him at QB7 and he finished at QB9. And then come on, what about Jacoby Brissett? Brissett has been a fantasy gem since taking over, and even without Marv, we ranked him as the QB10 and he finished as a starting quarterback on the week at QB12 overall. Okay, but we've got a cop to our misses as well, and we start with Shedeur Sanders, and just like everyone else on the planet, we didn't have him inside of the top 5, but after a massive 4-touchdown day, he finished at QB2 overall on the week. Okay, but what about Aaron Rodgers? And all of a sudden, Aaron Rodgers thought that it was a good idea to throw the ball downfield to DK Metcalf consistently? Oh, what about that? It hasn't been the case most of the season. So we had him ranked too low. And then our next miss is J.J. McCarthy. And hey, kudos to J.J. McCarthy for having a top 10 week in Week 15. He only had 163 yards passing, but he ended with 3 touchdowns. There's no way we had him in the top 10 last week, and that's where he finished. All right, so let's move it on to Week 15, and we start in Tier 1. We've got Josh Allen, Matthew Stafford, Joe Burrow, Drake May, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts. And topping the list, we've got Josh Allen, and the QB1 coming off of his 3rd best fantasy game of the year. Now gets a Patriots team that he scored 20 points back on in Week 5. Allen has 39 points more than the next closest quarterback, but he could be playing in the snow once again this week. At number 2, we have Matthew Stafford, and Matthew Stafford at home against his former team in the Detroit Lions, who allow the 5th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, and Stafford has thrown for multiple touchdowns in 11 of 13 games this season. Plus, the Rams clinch a playoff berth with a win, so he's very motivated. At number 3, we have Joe Burrow, and over the last 2 weeks, Joe Burrow is the QB4 overall. T. Higgins is once again in concussion protocol, but Burrow didn't have him 2 weeks ago when they faced this Baltimore defense either, and he still scored 19 fantasy points. At number 4, we have Drake May, and it's only been 1 game all year where May did not throw a touchdown. It was Week 5 against this Bills team, and Buffalo allows the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, and there's a chance of snow for this matchup, but New England clinches the AFC East with a win. At number 5, we have Lamar Jackson, and after 3 straight games in single digits, Lamar bounced back in Week 14 to score 22 fantasy points, and he also had his first rushing touchdown since Week 1. Now he gets the same Cincinnati defense that he finished 2 weeks ago, where he put up 260 scoreless yards. At number 6, we have Jalen Hurts, and Hurts went from having 2 interceptions through 12 games to having 4 in Week 14 alone. He also had a fumble and the first ever negative 4-point play in fantasy. Let's hope that it was just a bad week and he can bounce back again this week against Vegas. All right, that's it for Tier 1. Now, before we head into the next tier, I want to make sure that you're all set up on Underdog. And you already know that we're crushing those player pick'ems on Underdog this year. So what are you waiting for? Head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app and create a new account using the referral code HEADLINERS when you do so. Then just make your initial deposit and come join a contest. And if you sign up with that promo code, again, it's HEADLINERS, you'll get access to all of the promos that Underdog offers weekly. And check this out, when you play your first $5, they're going to give you $75 in bonus funds. So you play 5, you get 75. It's that easy. And don't forget, Jake is also breaking down the best picks weekly in our show on Fridays. Links to join are in the description, and we look forward to playing with you this week. All right, baby, let's turn the page to Tier 2. We've got Jackson Dart, Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, Patrick Mahomes, Baker Mayfield, and Trevor Lawrence. At number 7, we've got Jackson Dart, and Dart's last game before the bye against New England was his worst of the year, yet he still scored 13 points. Now he gets a Washington team that allows over 20 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, so we could see him surpass that 20-point mark once again this week. At number 8, we have Brock Purdy, and Purdy is coming off of the bye, and his offensive weapons are healthy, and he gets a home matchup against the Titans, who were just shredded by Shedeur Sanders and the Browns. Purdy has the potential for a big week. At number 9, we have Dak Prescott, and Dak has thrown for at least 320 yards in 3 straight games. He's the QB3 overall on the season, but now he gets a tough matchup against Minnesota, who allows the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, and CeeDee Lamb is currently in concussion protocol. At number 10, we have Jared Goff, and Goff has been the model of consistency lately. He scored 16-plus fantasy points in 5 of his last 6, and now he takes this high-powered offense to LA to face the Rams, who are much easier to throw on than they are to run on. At number 11 is Patrick Mahomes, and it's December, and the Chiefs are below 500, which is something we are not used to. Mahomes is playing through a knee injury, and they can't lose any more games. Unfortunately, he gets the Chargers, who allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. At number 12, we have Baker Mayfield, and the Mike Evans return is nearing, and Baker desperately needs him. Baker has now scored less than 15 fantasy points in 3 straight games, but luckily gets a matchup this week against Atlanta, who he has dominated in the past. And at number 13, we have Trevor Lawrence, and Lawrence continues to stay hot. He's not thrown for multiple touchdowns in 3 straight games, and the Jags have won 5 of their last 6. Now he gets a home game against the Jets and their average pass defense. All right, that's it for Tier 2. Now let's turn the page to Tier 3. We have Sam Darnold, Bo Nix, Jordan Love, C.J. Stroud, Caleb Williams, Jacoby Brissett, and Justin Herbert. At number 14, we've got Sam Darnold, and to start the season, Darnold was one of the safest weekly quarterbacks, and now it seems like he either scores 5 or 20 points. But he'll have a great matchup this week against Indianapolis, who may be without 3 members of their secondary. At number 15, we have Bo Nix, and a Denver win clinches them a playoff berth, but it's not going to be easy against a Packers defense that allows less than 15 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Maybe more safe than ceiling for Nix in Week 15. At number 16, we have Jordan Love, and Love has been one of the hottest quarterbacks over the last 2 weeks. He now has 7 passing touchdowns over his last 2 games, but he'll get a much more difficult matchup this week against Denver, who allows the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. At 17, we have C.J. Stroud, and watching Stroud last week against Kansas City, it looked like he was playing well, but he only had 203 yards and 1 touchdown while completing only 48% of his passes. We expect a much better performance this week at home against an average Arizona Cardinals defense. At number 18, we have Caleb Williams, and Caleb has struggled as of late, but look at some of the matchups he's had. Tough games against Green Bay, Pittsburgh, Minnesota. Now he gets Cleveland, and he will be down a pass catcher with no Rome Odunze, and it's hard to put him any higher than 18. And number 19 is Jacoby Brissett. And this one was tough because Brissett deserves massive respect, but on the other hand, so does the Houston defense. Brissett has been a top 12 quarterback in every one of his starts this year, but Houston has not allowed a top 12 quarterback performance to any quarterback this year, and that's why we have him right here at 19. At number 20, we've got Justin Herbert, and kudos to Herbert playing with a surgically repaired hand. Dude showed a lot of toughness and willingness to do whatever it takes to get his team a victory. Unfortunately, now he gets a tough Chiefs defense in the freezing cold weather, and I live here, and let me tell you, it's cold. All right, so there you go. There's your top 20 quarterbacks for Week 15 in Tiers 1, 2, and 3. And we've got a couple of guys on the outside looking in with Shedeur Sanders, J.J. McCarthy, Marcus Mariota, Tyler Shuck, Bryce Young, and Aaron Rodgers. And that's your Week 15 quarterback breakdown, and there's no second chances now, so lock in your starter, trust the process, and let's get you to the next round, baby. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and let's go get that championship, Headliner Nation.
Analytics, off the chain, all the channels, not the same.